You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
Do you remember how exciting it was the first time you saw this? Well, what if I told you that long before the MCU or Fox's X-Men films, there was another Marvel shared universe that first hit our screens all the way back in 1992? Hey everyone, welcome back to Panels to Pixels. My name is Josh, and while the idea of a shared universe is nothing new to us comic book fans, arguably no other media franchise has had as big a cultural impact as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The idea of a singular continuity and overarching narratives being told across multiple movies and even expanding out to other mediums has proven itself to be pretty revolutionary in blockbuster filmmaking. Its influence can be seen in other studios' attempts to replicate the MCU's commercial success, for example in DC's TV and film multiverses, and even in Universal's dead on arrival Dark Universe. But if, like me, you were around in the 90s and watching a lot of Saturday morning cartoons, you might remember a number of animated series based on Marvel Comics characters, which were, for many people, their first introduction to the likes of the X-Men, SpiderMan, and the larger Marvel Universe as a whole. I know that for myself, along with the toys and video games, it was the animated shows that got me interested in comics, and in particular it was the rich lore and continuity that drew me in and has kept me coming back for over 20 years. Today we're going to be looking at the history of the Marvel Animated Universe of the 1990s and how its legacy and influence can still be felt in serialized storytelling today. The show that kicked it all off in 1992 was X-Men the Animated Series. With a team lineup and visual style ripped straight from the pages of the early 90s Jim Lee drawn X-Men comics, the show's success laid in its ability to pull from the vast canon of comic book storylines and truncate them into bite-sized 22-minute episodes. Despite some reluctance from studio executives, the show's creators fought for sprawling storylines that could be told over several episodes, as opposed to the standalone episodic format that was typical for kids' TV at the time. One of the ways in which the X-Men's producers were able to convince the higher-ups that it was a viable way of plotting the series was by introducing each episode with a clip montage that would recap the previous episode and get viewers up to speed. Thus, the now iconic Previously on X-Men was born.
Sharon Janis, who had the thankless task of being the editor for X-Men the Animated Series, and she was the one who kind of came up with and encouraged the little 10 to 20 second recap at the start of the episodes where that was recalled for, and then the whole Previously on X-Men idea by going to the money men and saying, look, if you let me do this, if you let me edit this down so there can be a little recap, you will have that fewer seconds to pay for animation.
This method of storytelling in an animated show was not without complication though, as X-Men story editor and writer Eric Lewald explains.
And we had problems that first season by having, coming in late and having some episodes that weren't animated very well. And so that kind of scared them off. And what John was saying, by the time SpiderMan came along, they were just saying no. Look, they were scared to death that we ended up 4 months late going on the air, and however many hundreds of thousands of dollars that cost them. And one of the half dozen reasons we were late was that it was connected storytelling.
Multi-episode arcs allowed X-Men the Animated Series writers the freedom to adapt iconic storylines such as the Dark Phoenix Saga and Days of Future Past. With 20 plus years of established comics lore at their disposal, and in particular the works of legendary X-Men scribe Chris Claremont, the show was able to cherry-pick the best and most suitable storylines and, with the benefit of hindsight, trim away the fat to produce what some may consider the quintessential versions of these stories. This, along with the fact that the series didn't shy away from dealing with social issues such as religion, the Holocaust, and current events of the time such as AIDS hysteria, resulted in a Saturday morning cartoon that was refreshingly original in its approach and deeply engaging to both kids and adults without ever dumbing things down.
A powerful force has come to Pizza Hut. Marvel Comics X-Men.
The show was a huge hit, running for 5 seasons from 1992 to 1997, and paving the way for a new Renaissance era of Marvel animated series. The first to follow suit were adaptations of Iron Man and Fantastic Four, 2 shows that were produced for syndication and billed together as the Marvel Action Hour. Just as the character would serve as the nexus point of the MCU almost 20 years later, it was Iron Man who introduced us to a huge roster of comic book characters and demonstrated just how far-reaching this animated universe could be. From fellow Avengers such as Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye and War Machine, to Spider-Woman, MODOK and Fin Fang Foom.
Hi, heroes. Stan Lee here, inside the very spacecraft which changed the Fantastic Four from ordinary mortals to the world's greatest superheroes. And speaking of great, you won't believe today's exciting adventure, so get ready.
Fantastic Four, meanwhile, featured the debuts of fan-favourite characters such as Doctor Doom, Black Panther and the Inhumans, with additional guest appearances from the likes of Daredevil, Thor and Ghost Rider. The Fantastic Four cartoon also introduced fans to the Silver Surfer, who would later get his own animated series, albeit with a slightly tweaked origin story. Ghost Rider was also supposed to get a spin-off series, and the episode starring him was intended as a backdoor pilot of sorts. Sadly, the surprise runaway success of X-Men put increased pressure on Iron Man and Fantastic Four to perform well both on-screen and off. Toy manufacturer Toy Biz, who were then partially owned by Marvel, had held the exclusive license to produce action figures based on Marvel characters since 1990, but these toys hadn't exactly been flying off shelves. That is, until the commercial juggernaut of X-Men suddenly made characters like Wolverine and Cyclops the must-have action figures. It was now in Toy Biz and Marvel's best interest to produce more hit shows that could launch successful toy lines. Iron Man was seen as the perfect property to capitalise on the concept of selling multiple cheap-to-produce versions of the same figure on account of billionaire playboy philanthropist Tony Stark's ever-expanding collection of mechanical armours. It's possible that increased interference from Marvel and Toy Biz, along with general low budget and quality of animation when compared to the X-Men, led to the Marvel Action Hour shows being poorly received by fans. The Fantastic Four was even lampooned by the comics themselves when, in FF issue number 396, writer Tom DeFalco included a scene in which Scott Lang as Ant-Man is watching the show and lambasting it. It's hard to imagine a time when nobody outside of comic book readers cared about Iron Man, but the show, along with Fantastic Four, came and went without fanfare after just 2 seasons.
The truth is, I am Iron Man.
Who?
Despite Iron Man making cameo appearances in a few episodes of the Fantastic Four, there were reportedly no plans for an official crossover. That being said, one character who did bridge the gap between the shows was the Hulk, who guest starred in both before getting his own spin-off series in 1996, The Incredible Hulk. The Jade Giants animated series was a huge step up in quality and was critically acclaimed despite ultimately suffering from low ratings. Former live-action Hulk star Lou Ferrigno provided the voice of the central character in a cartoon series that was much darker in tone and more in line with X-Men. Iron Man guest starred with voice actor Robert Hayes reprising his role as Tony Stark, cementing the continuity between the shows. Additionally, there were guest appearances once again from Ghost Rider, Thor, Doctor Doom and members of the Fantastic Four, with the Hulk himself referring to the events of his appearances in the Marvel Action Hour series. Of all the 90s Marvel cartoons, this one is probably the most underrated, and I would absolutely recommend checking out the first series at least. The final animated series that I'm going to talk about in great detail is, of course, 1994's SpiderMan the Animated Series. This was Fox Kids' big budget follow-up to the X-Men, starring Marvel's most iconic and recognisable character. The stakes were higher, and so was the standard of animation, including the use of some nifty state-of-the-art computer-generated backgrounds. With the full force of tie-in comics, toys and video games behind it, this show was shaping up to be a commercial smash hit. And, with great power, there must also come the potential for crossover. The series producer and story editor, John Semper Jr., explains, "At that time, I had the entire Marvel Universe available to me for my Spider-Man series. That probably can never happen again in any Marvel cartoon series. Many characters have now been sold to different studios and production companies, so that getting them together on screen again would prove to be a licensing nightmare. It's impossible for it to ever happen again. Consequently, seeing Spidey guest star on TV with so many other Marvel characters is a unique feature that only my series will ever have."
Whoa! You don't find the Fantastic Four in a sewer, or the Avengers. Never have I seen the Avengers in a sewer.
Just 10 minutes into the first episode of Season 1, the webhead name-drops the Fantastic Four, the Avengers and the Hulk, and this was just a taste of things to come. With Spider-Man the Animated Series, we got guest appearances from Captain America, who had previously been featured in an episode of the Fantastic Four and was at one point set to get his own spin-off show, plus the return of Robert Hayes as Iron Man. The villain Hydro Man was featured in episodes of both Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, which aired 1 week apart from each other. Spider-Man, along with Daredevil, the X-Men and Juggernaut, also made guest appearances on the Fantastic Four cartoon that was running concurrently. And you'd better believe that Spider-Man would cross over into the X-Men series, appearing in 2 episodes.
Let me see where you got hit.
Don't bother. I heal real quick.
But Spider-Man would also play host to the most ambitious crossover of Marvel characters to feature in any of the animated shows from this era. Fittingly, this takes place in the 3-part adaptation of the granddaddy of major comic book events, 1984's Secret Wars. Bringing together Spidey, Captain America, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom and the Red Skull with the original voice actors from their respective series in most cases, is by far the most impressive crossover of the Marvel Animated Universe, and solidifies it as a cohesive shared continuity to rival even that of the MCU. It was pretty mind-blowing as a child to see all of these characters interacting on screen together, and it's these episodes alone that inspired me to write this video essay. This moment in particular, as the camera pans across all the heroes, could be seen as having laid the groundwork for that iconic team reveal shot in 2012's Avengers movie. To me, the Spider-Man cartoon occupies the same space as 1992's Batman the Animated Series, in being the perfect distillation of everything I love about the character and his stories. It is Christopher Daniel Barnes' voice I hear when I read Peter Parker's dialogue in the comics. It's the dusky, technicolor New York skyline I see when I picture Spidey web-swinging through the city, and while we can all agree that J.K. Simmons will probably never be bested in the role of J. Jonah Jameson in live action, let us not forget about this guy, as played by the inimitable Edward Asner.
How dare you use that kind of language in description of me?
The last 2 shows to be produced that are now considered part of the Marvel Animated Universe were Spider-Man Unlimited and Avengers United They Stand, which were very poorly received. Spider-Man Unlimited in particular was created to fulfill a contractual agreement that would allow for reruns of the 1994 series in anticipation of a live-action movie. As such, the quality suffered and it throws up some inconsistencies in the otherwise fairly robust continuity between shows. Avengers United They Stand, meanwhile, offers a look at a future version of the Avengers team inspired by the hit show Batman Beyond, which was in turn inspired by the Spider-Man 2099 comic books. Due to a combination of low ratings and Marvel's financial problems, this series and Spider-Man Unlimited were cancelled after only 13 episodes each. Behind the scenes, Marvel Entertainment Group had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection just a few years earlier, and was slowly recovering after diversifying their comics output and selling off the film rights to hit characters such as Spider-Man and the X-Men. Meanwhile, kids' TV was undergoing a seismic shift with the overwhelming popularity of anime series such as Pokemon, which had just begun airing in the US. These low-budget Marvel shows just couldn't cut it anymore, and the Marvel Animated Universe reached its anticlimactic end in the year 2000. The impact of the Marvel cartoons of the 1990s can still be felt today, particularly in the comic book movies that dominate Hollywood. Between the animated series, the toys, and the video games, the X-Men and Spider-Man became household names almost a decade before their first hit movies. And it was those two movie franchises that kicked off the superhero boom that still rules box offices worldwide. It was alleged that in order to prepare for 2000's X-Men film, director Bryan Singer opted to binge-watch all 76 episodes of X-Men the Animated Series, rather than trudging through 40 years of comic book history. Which, as far as things that have been alleged against Bryan Singer go, is one of the more pleasant. The influence of the Spider-Man cartoon is much more apparent in the way that this scene from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 is a straight-up recreation of this scene from the cartoon.
For a second, I thought I was going out of my mind?
Furthermore, I can't help feeling that the glistening, tangerine-tinged look of New York City in Raimi's Spider-Man films was partly inspired by the sublimely beautiful visualization of Manhattan in the animated series. Between 1992 and 2000, 8 shows across 253 episodes made up the Marvel Animated Universe, introducing a whole generation to the characters that would go on to dominate our pop culture. They were X-Men, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, Silver Surfer, Spider-Man Unlimited, and Avengers United They Stand. And so, with the architects of the MCU promising a big payoff for the 10-year-long build-up of crossovers and overlapping story arcs, and the future looking bright with the Disney-Fox deal on the horizon opening the door to a new era of serialized storytelling, it may be time to dust off your VCRs, grab a bowl of breakfast cereal, and reflect on the cartoons of the past that got us here.
And I said to Jack, what if his skin turns green?
Excuse me, I'm looking for some guy named Stan Lee.
What? Spider-Man? Pam, hold my calls for a while. I think I've finally gone crazy.
Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more stuff like this, you should definitely subscribe to Panels to Pixels, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.